The Battle of the Falkland Islands was a British naval victory over the Imperial German Navy on 8 December 1914 during the First World War in the South Atlantic. The British, after a defeat of the Battle of Coronel on 1 November, sent a large force to track down and destroy the victorious German cruiser squadron. Admiral Graf Maximilian von Spee, commanding the German squadron of 2 armoured cruisers, SMS Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, the light cruisers SMS Nuremberg, Dresden and Leipzig, and 3 auxiliaries, attempted to raid the British supply base at Stanley in the Falkland Islands. A larger British squadron, consisting of the battle cruisers HMS Invincible and Inflexible, the armoured cruisers HMS Carnarvon, Cornwall and Kent, the armed merchant cruiser HMS Macedonia and the light cruisers HMS Bristol and Glasgow, had arrived in the port only the day before. Visibility was at its maximum, the sea was placid with a gentle breeze from the northwest, and the day was bright and sunny. The advance cruisers of the German squadron had been detected early on. By 9 o'clock that morning the British battle cruisers and cruisers were in hot pursuit of the 5 German vessels, these having taken flight in line abreast to the southeast. All except Dresden and the auxiliary Seydlitz were hunted down and sunk. Background: the British battle cruisers each mounted 8 12-inch guns, whereas Spees were equipped with 8 210mm pieces. Additionally, the battle cruisers could make 25.5 knots against Spees' 22.5 knots. Thus, the British battle cruisers not only significantly outgunned them but could outrun their opponents too. The obsolete pre-dreadnought battleship, HMS Canopus, had been grounded at Stanley to act as a makeshift defense battery for the area. Spee's squadron at the outbreak of hostilities. The German East Asia Squadron commanded by Spee was outclassed and outgunned by the Royal Navy and the Japanese Navy. Spee and the High Command did not believe Germany's Asian possessions could be defended and doubted the squadron could even survive in that theater. Spee wanted to get his ships home and began by heading southeast across the Pacific, although he was pessimistic about their chances. Following Spee's success at the 1 November 1914 Battle of Coronel off the coast of Valparaiso, Chile, where his squadron sank the cruisers HMS Good Hope and Monmouth, Spee's force put into Valparaiso, as required under international law for belligerent ships in neutral countries. The ships left within 24 hours, moving to Mas Afuera, 400 miles off the Chilean coast. There they received news of the loss of the cruiser SMS Emden, which had previously detached from the squadron and had been raiding in the Indian Ocean. They also learned of the fall of the German colony at Tsingtao in China, which had been their home port. On 15 November, the squadron moved to Bahia San Quintin on the Chilean coast, where a ceremony was held to award 300 Iron Crosses, second class, to crew members and an Iron Cross first class to Admiral Spee. Spee's officers counselled a return to Germany. The squadron had used half its ammunition at Coronel, the supply could not be replenished, and it was difficult even to obtain coal. Intelligence reports suggested that the British ships HMS Defence, Cornwall and Carnarvon were stationed in the River Plate, and that there had been no British warships at Stanley when recently visited by a steamer. Spee had been concerned about reports of a British battleship, Canopus, but its location was unknown. On 26 November, the squadron set sail for Cape Horn, which they reached on 1 December, then anchored at Picton Island, where they stayed for 3 days distributing coal from a captured British collier, the Drum Ewer, and hunting. On 6 December, the British vessel was scuttled and its crew transferred to the auxiliary Seydlitz. The same day Spee proposed to raid the Falkland Islands before setting course for Germany. The raid was unnecessary because the squadron now had as much coal as it could carry. Most of Spee's captains opposed the raid, but he nevertheless decided to proceed. British preparations. On 30 October, retired Admiral of the fleet Sir John Fisher was reappointed First Sea Lord to replace Admiral Prince Louis of Battenburn, who had been forced to resign because of public outcry against a perceived German prince running the British Navy. On 3 November, Fisher was advised that Spee had been sighted off Valparaiso and acted to reinforce Craddock by ordering defense, already sent to patrol the eastern coast of South America, to reinforce his squadron. On 4 November, news of the defeat at Coronel arrived. As a result, the battle cruisers Invincible and Inflexible were ordered to leave the Grand Fleet and sail to Plymouth for overhaul and preparation for service abroad. Chief of Staff at the Admiralty was Vice Admiral Doveton Sturdy. Fisher had a long-standing disagreement with Sturdy, who had been one of those calling for his earlier dismissal as First Sea Lord in 1911. So he took the opportunity to appoint Sturdy Commander-in-Chief, South Atlantic and Pacific, to command a new squadron from Invincible. On the 11th of November, Invincible and Inflexible left Devonport, although repairs to Invincible were incomplete and she sailed with workmen still aboard. Despite the urgency of the situation and the maximum speed of around 25 knots, the ships were forced to cruise at 10 knots to conserve coal in order to complete the long journey south across the Atlantic. The two ships were also heavily loaded with supplies. Although secrecy of the mission was considered important so as to surprise Spee, Lieutenant Hurst from Glasgow heard locals discussing the forthcoming arrival of the ships while ashore at Cape Verde on 17 November. However, the news did not reach Spee. Sturdy arrived at the Abrolhos Rocks on 26 November, where Rear Admiral Stoddart awaited him with the remainder of the squadron. Sturdy announced his intention to depart for the Falkland Islands on 29 November. From there, the fast light cruisers Glasgow and Bristol would patrol seeking Spee, summoning reinforcements if they found him. Captain Luce of Glasgow, who had been at the Battle of Coronel, objected that there was no need to wait so long and persuaded Sturdy to depart a day early. The squadron was delayed during the journey for 12 hours when the cable towing targets for practice firing became wrapped around one of Invincible's propellers. But the ships arrived on the morning of 7 December. The two light cruisers moored in the inner part of Stanley Harbour, while the larger ships remained in the deeper outer harbour of Port William. Divers set about removing the offending cable from Invincible. Cornwall's boiler fires were extinguished to make repairs, and Bristol had one of her engines dismantled. The famous ship SS Great Britain, reduced to a coal bunker, supplied coal to Invincible and Inflexible. The armed merchant cruiser Macedonia was ordered to patrol the harbour, while Kent maintained steam in her boilers, ready to replace Macedonia the next day. The 8th of December, Spee's fleet arrived in the morning of the same day. An unlikely source of intelligence on the movement of the German ships was from Mrs. Muriel Felton, wife of the manager of a sheep station at Fitzroy, and her maids Christina Goss and Marion MacLeod. They were alone when Felton received a telephone call from Port Stanley advising that German ships were approaching the islands. The maids took turns riding to the top of a nearby hill to record the movements of the ships, which Felton relayed to Port Stanley by telephone. Her reports allowed Bristol and Macedonia to take up the best positions to intercept. The Admiralty later presented the women with silver plates and Felton received an OBE for her actions. Battle. Opening moves. Spee's cruisers, Gneisenau and Nuremberg, approached Stanley first. At the time, the entire British fleet was coaling. Some believe that, had Spee pressed the attack, Sturdy's ships would have been easy targets. Although this is a subject of conjecture and some controversy, any British ship that tried to leave would have faced the full firepower of the German ships. Having a vessel sunk might also have blocked the rest of the British squadron inside the harbour. Fortunately for the British, the Germans were surprised by gunfire from an unexpected source. Canopus, which had been grounded as a guard ship and was behind a hill. This was enough to check the Germans' advance. The sight of the distinctive tripod masts of the British battle cruisers confirmed that they were facing a better-equipped enemy. Kent was already making her way out of the harbour and had been ordered to pursue Spee's ships. Made aware of the German ships, Sturdy had ordered the crews to breakfast, knowing that Canopus had bought them time while steam was raised. To Spee, with his crew battle-weary and his ships outgunned, the outcome seemed inevitable. Realizing his danger too late, and having lost any chance to attack the British ships while they were at anchor, Spee and his squadron dashed for the open sea. The British left port around 1000. Spee was ahead by 15 miles, but there was a lot of daylight left for the faster battle cruisers to catch up. It was 1300 when the British battle cruisers opened fire, but it took them half an hour to get the range of Leipzig. Realizing that he could not outrun the British ships, Spee decided to engage them with his armoured cruisers alone, to give the light cruisers a chance to escape. They turned to fight just after 1320. The German armoured cruisers had the advantage of a freshening northwest breeze, which caused the funnel smoke of the British ships to obscure their target practically throughout the action. Gneisenau second-in-command Hans Pochhammer indicated that there was a long respite for the Germans during the early stages of the battle, as the British attempted unsuccessfully to force Admiral Spee away from his advantageous position. Despite initial success by Scharnhorst and Gneisenau in striking Invincible, the British capital ships suffered little damage. Spee then turned to escape, but the battle cruisers came within extreme firing range 40 minutes later. Invincible and Inflexible engaged Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, while Sturdy detached his cruisers to chase Leipzig and Nuremberg. Inflexible and Invincible turned to fire broadsides at the armoured cruisers, and Spee responded by trying to close the range. His flagship Scharnhorst took extensive damage with funnels flattened, fires and a list. The list became worse at 1604, and she sank by 1617. Gneisenau continued to fire and evade until 1715, by which time her ammunition had been exhausted, and her crew allowed her to sink at 1802. During her death throes, Admiral Sturdy continued to engage Gneisenau with his two battle cruisers and the cruiser Carnarvon, rather than detaching one of the battle cruisers to hunt down the escaping Dresden. 190 of Gneisenau's crew were rescued from the water. Both of the British battle cruisers had received about 40 hits between them from the German ships, with 1 crewman killed and 4 injured. Meanwhile, Nuremberg and Leipzig had run from the British cruisers. Nuremberg finally turned for battle at 1730. Kent had the advantage in shell weight and armour. Nuremberg suffered 2 boiler explosions around 1830, giving the advantage in speed and manoeuvrability to Kent. The Germans' ship then rolled over and sank at 1927 after a long chase. The cruisers Glasgow and Cornwall had chased down Leipzig. Glasgow closed to finish Leipzig, which had run out of ammunition but was still flying her battle ensign. Leipzig fired 2 flares, so Glasgow ceased fire. At 21:23, more than 80 miles southeast of the Falklands, she also rolled over and sank, leaving only 18 survivors. Outcome: casualties and damage were extremely disproportionate. The British suffered only very lightly. Admiral Spee and his 2 sons were among the German dead. Rescued German survivors, 215 total, became prisoners on the British ships. Most were from the Gneisenau, 9 were from Nuremberg and 18 were from Leipzig. Scharnhorst was lost with all hands. One of Gneisenau's officers who lived had been the sole survivor on 3 different guns, but was pulled from the water saying he was a first cousin of the British commander. Of the known German force of 8 ships, 2 escaped: the auxiliary Seydlitz and the light cruiser Dresden. which roamed at large for a further 3 months before her captain was cornered by a British squadron off the Juan Fernandez Islands on 14 March 1915. After fighting a short battle, Dresden's captain evacuated his ship and scuttled her by detonating the main ammunition magazine. As a consequence of the battle, German commerce raiding on the high seas by regular warships of the Kaiserliche Marine was brought to an end. However, Germany put several armed merchant vessels into service as commerce raiders until the end of the war.